Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thanks for coming back as always. Today, I want to talk about the Olympics. At least that's where I want to start because last night were the closing ceremonies, or considering how you look at things with the time changes and all, maybe the closing ceremonies were Saturday night to us. I think Tokyo is 13 hours behind, but that's irrelevant. Regardless of when it was, the Olympics are officially over now. And it's funny, on a side note, I was reading that the ratings were down as much as 40% over the 2016 Olympics. So I don't know if that's because of the pandemic. I don't know if it's because NBC had the brilliant idea trying to put that a lot of the live stuff behind the paywall. I'm not paying for the Peacock network just to watch Olympic judo live. Now, with that said, it's only $4.99, but still, it's the principle of the thing. I'm not doing all of that. It reminds me once of I saw an interview with Oprah Winfrey, and Oprah told the story about when she was in a hotel and somebody asked her if she wanted a bottle of water, and she said yeah, and they told her that the bottle of water cost $7, and she was like, "Nah, I'm not paying that. It's the principle of the thing. A $7 bottle of water is a $7 bottle of water." And that's how I feel about the Peacock network when it comes to watching the Olympics live. So forget that. I'm not paying that money. Blah blah blah. But I'm not cheap, I promise. I'm just wise with the dollar. But the point I'm making in all of that is that I love the competition of the Olympics. I love watching it. And, we'll see what happens in the next 3 years. Some of those sports, though, are just weird. But hey, to each his own. And I'm saying that I love the Olympics and all of that. And while that's cool and all, I don't want that to be confused with my endorsing the corrupt practices of the IOC, and that's the International Olympic Committee, for anybody that wants to look it up. And I won't get into all of the details of what makes them corrupt, but you can do a Google search on that. That has absolutely nothing to do with dating, but it does make for an interesting read. Those cats, they are getting over. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Like many sports, I love watching track and field. That's my favorite thing to watch when it comes to the Olympics. And while there are many different backstories that surround the competitions, like Allison Felix running in her last Olympics, wrapping it up with 11 medals and all, breaking Carl Lewis's record and all that good stuff. And then the people that miss, like the Shakari Richardson stuff, the smoking weed because her mother that she never knew died, and missing the Olympics, and now everybody's all butthurt about that. Not Reggie butthurt, but just butthurt in general. But I don't, I like that stuff, but none of that stuff really matters because that really has nothing to do with the format of this show, which is dating while adulting. None of that involves dating. Okay. But with that said, there is a story that does kind of tie into all of this, excuse me, that does kind of fascinate me. And that's what I'm going to spend a little time talking about today. And that is the story of Brianna Rollins McNeil. Brianna, she's the 2016, she is a 2016 Olympic gold medalist. I think it was 110 meter hurdles. She won a gold medal in that, if I'm correct. She also qualified to be part of the 2021 Olympic Games, but she didn't actually get to compete in Tokyo. The Olympics had just passed. And the reason that she didn't compete in this past Olympics is because she is in the process of serving a 5-year suspension. Now, some of you all probably know this story already, but for those that don't, please stay tuned. And plus, I have more stuff on the back end to talk about. But and for those that are wondering why I'm talking about that, after shooting down all of those other things that I talking about they don't fit the format of this podcast, I'll get to that soon enough, how it applies. But Rihanna's married. I'm just throwing that out there for later. Anyway, the official reason that Rihanna was suspended was for, quote, tampering within the results management process. That's a fancy way of saying that she missed a drug test. Actually, she missed several, but I'll get into the details of that a little bit later as well. Now, that's not news. Somebody missing a drug test. Drugs are prevalent in the Olympics, and whether it's taking drugs or ducking out on the drug test, it really doesn't matter because all of it has happened before and it has happened rather frequently. So it's not like that's breaking news. I don't really care about that, the fact that she missed a drug test. But here's where it gets a little bit more interesting, at least to me. She missed this drug test because she was recovering from a medical procedure. We later found out that that procedure was an abortion. She said that she was recovering, she was in bed recovering from that procedure, and she didn't hear the knock on the door when the drug testing agents came to her house to collect a urine sample. They also called her phone and she didn't answer. And for people that don't know how the drug testing collection process works, basically, you need to keep the anti-doping officials informed of your whereabouts at all times when you're competing. And with that information, those same officials, they can, as the kids say, pull up on you at any given time to request a sample. And if, for whatever reason, you're not around when they pull up, as the kids say, well, you end up winding up in the Brianna McNeil position. And while that sounds mad invasive, that's what happens. Those are the measures that they feel like they have to take when so many athletes cheat. And for people that follow track and field, you know that there are a lot of athletes that cheat. There are countries that have had to send their whole delegations home for cheating. So if there's a way to skirt the rules, an athlete will find it. So all of that so that when they want to pull up, they can pull up on you when you least expect it. So if you do happen to have drugs in your system, hoping to get them out in a couple of days, no, they'll catch you, or at least that's the goal. But with all of that said, let's go back to Brianna not answering the phone and not answering the door. Now, now for something like that, that seems like an extraordinarily harsh punishment for someone just because they didn't hear the doorbell or the phone on a random day. At least that's what our defenders will say. And but, and there's always a but, this suspension follows other suspensions in the past for doing the same thing, not being where she said she'd be when the testers showed up. Okay. On those other occasions that she ducked out on the test, wasn't around when they came to test or whatever, she claimed that she forgot to update the testers on her whereabouts in the system. And on one of those occasions, she said that she updated her whereabouts, but put in the wrong time that she'd be where she said that she'd be. So basically, while in competition and you're having to let the testers know where you are, there's a system where you manually have to input, I'm going to be here from this time to this time. And you just basically have to go through that process for as long as they require while you're quote unquote in competition. In competition means whenever the parameters are set. Like if you're going to be competing in the Olympics from mid-July to the 1st of August, they'll say, okay, you're considered in competition the 1st of June. So from the 1st of June through the 1st of August, you have to let us know exactly where you're going to be. You have to put it in the system. So a couple of times she didn't put it in the system. One time she put it in the system, but didn't put it in the right times. So, and there's more to that whole story, like paperwork dates, where the paperwork dates that were changed and all of this and all of that. And while I'm on that note, let me send a shout out to the New York Times. They wrote a great article on this whole thing, and I will link to that in the show notes for anyone that might be interested in reading it for themselves. And then once you read it, and get all the information, then you can judge her guilt or innocence if you care. I really don't care. Yeah. Skip it. If she was taking drugs, if she wasn't taking drugs, if she skipped out on the drug test, it really doesn't matter to me. Doesn't have anything to do with this show. But regardless, you have to admit that it's kind of interesting though. Anyway, all of that was just more backstory for what actually does apply to this podcast. And so that's what I'm going to get to next. So when Brianna was talking to investigators about why all of this stuff happened, so basically she skipped out on the drug test. She didn't answer the phone. She didn't answer the door. So when they finally caught up to her, they wanted to talk to her to find out what happened. And that's when she told them specifically that she'd had an abortion. And she had that abortion to compete in the 2020 Olympics. On a side note, she also said that she really felt bad when the games got postponed to 2021. And then she realized that she could have had the kid all along. So it wasn't that she didn't want the child, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. Now is where it applies to this podcast. Remember earlier when I said that Brianna has a husband? When I first heard this story, I was thinking that she was single and she just got caught up with some dude, some random dude, and got knocked up. Or even that she might have had a boyfriend, but the commitment between the two of them wasn't so tight that they wanted to raise a kid together and they just got caught out in the rain, metaphorically speaking, and they just made the decision to go ahead and have the abortion. It happens a lot actually. But for me, speaking personally, it just takes on a different context when I learned that she was happily married, and not just happily married to her college sweetheart. And I guess being married to your college sweetheart really doesn't have any bearing on it. It just adds a certain romantic element to the story that I thought was cute. But she has a husband. They're happily married. She gets pregnant by her husband. To me, that kind of just adds a different spin on the whole thing. Like, I'm wondering if they were both on board with her having an abortion, for the sole purposes of competing in the Olympics. The Olympics that she not only competed in before, but actually won a gold medal. So she won a gold medal, great. And then to try to get more medals, she finds out that she's pregnant and decides to have an abortion so she could go get more gold medals. And I know in my voice that it might sound that I'm being critical or judgmental, but I really don't mean to. It is just fascinating to me that that was the reasoning for having the abortion. And not to say that if you're pro-choice, that you need to, of all people, in make a prove to a man or impress a man as to why you want to do it. If you want to do it and it's your body, hey, who am I to tell you what to do with your body? Yeah. But with that said, going back to Brianna and the husband, I'm just curious as to how the conversation went between the two of them and when they found out that they were pregnant. I'm wondering if he was like, this is our decision and I want to keep it. And she was like, well, it's my body and I'll do what I want. I want this gold medal. Or Was she like, I really want to keep it? And he was like, forget that. We need this sponsorship money that you'll get by going to the Olympics. Or were they both like, F this, we need to get that sponsorship money by going to the Olympics? And that ultimately is the thing that fascinates me about the story. And that's how it applies to this podcast. And that's the reason that I'm bringing it up. I would just love to know the behind the scenes conversation that went on between the two of them, a happily married couple, as if anyone's really truly happy these days. But let's just assume a happily married couple that finds out that they're pregnant. She admits that she wanted the child, but when it came down to it, they made the choice of aborting the child. You know, I don't know. I guess it just speaks to in an ideal marriage, or at least in my ideal marriage, you like for both parties involved to be equally yoked. But I find it hard to believe that the decision to go ahead with the abortion was an in sync decision. I'm sure there were, it was tough to come to the conclusion that they came to, regardless. But I find it hard to believe that it didn't come without some disagreement, if not all out arguing. And then on top of that, they eventually came to the agreement only to find out that with the postponement of the games from 20 to 21, they could have had the kid anyway, and she could have still competed. I mean, Allison Felix, who I referenced early, shoot, her kid was plastered all over the television while she was running in the Olympics. Yeah, and there are other women that have had kids and stuff like that and still competed and competed well. And I guess that's why she was kicking herself. But but surely with the two of them, Brianna and her husband, when they think back on that, I find it hard to believe that one of the spouses didn't give the other one the side eye at the least after finding out we could have had this kid anyway. Might have been her giving him the side eye because he might have pressured her into getting the abortion to get that sponsorship money, or it could have been him giving her the side eye because it's like, okay, you're going to choose the Olympics over a kid, and we could have had a kid anyway. It just speaks to the importance of finding someone that shares your values. And when I've had discussions about this topic with friends of mine, most of my friends, well, actually, all of them, they condemn both of them for making the choice they made for athletic achievement. But I don't look at them as bad for the choice they made. Ultimately, we're all going to have to stand before God, and we're going to have to answer to God for our own stuff. Yeah, nobody's going to get out unscathed. But with that said, it's just important that you're with someone that's aligned with you on your values. Like Brianna, she identifies as a Christian, and she said that that was a big reason for her depression that she suffered in the aftermath of all of this, and why ultimately she couldn't answer the door and she couldn't answer the phone because she was medicated, one, from having the abortion, and also she was depressed about the whole thing. And the depression um, increased when the games got pushed back and she realized that she could have had the child anyway. Yeah. But I wonder if she and her husband, or just couples in general that identify as Christians, if they discuss what Christianity looks like to them. Just like many, many Christians, they think abortion is a sin, they abhor abortion. But there are tons that don't feel that it conflicts with their faith. To me, Brianna and her husband's story also made me think of the role that passion plays in one's life. Like running was Brianna's passion. over children, or at least at that particular time. And I wonder if her husband knew to what extent that passion was. With that said, hmm, her husband was an athlete as well, though. He played big time college football, I think at Clemson. So that's one of the top programs in the country. It's not Ohio State, but it's one of the top programs in the country. So they both had athletic passions. And that might have been what drew them together ultimately. But I just wonder if he knew, assuming that the decision was ultimately her choice to have the abortion. I wonder if he knew how great that passion was and how much she was willing to sacrifice. Now, maybe they were equally yoked and they both agreed with it. Maybe they both had that same passion and just saw it as this is what we need to do. But it's just curious. Again, I would love to know what those conversations were like. And again, also, this is not to judge them or make him seem like he's an innocent victim when none of us knows those back conversations that they had. But maybe he was a victim. Maybe she did just strong arm him. Maybe he wasn't a victim. Maybe he agreed with it, or maybe he initiated it. I don't know. This story just makes me think about passions and career oriented, driven people just in general. And what it makes me think is anytime you meet someone you want and they want to get married and they want to have children, but I think everybody needs to find out how much and in the grand scheme of all of the things in that person's life, they might want to get married, they might actually get married, but is that marriage the most important thing in their life? Like, is their marriage more important than their career? Everybody will say that it is, but in all actuality, when you strip it down and you look at their actions, oftentimes what they say doesn't necessarily match their actions. And especially when people have kids, in a lot of cases, men fall into this category. Men will say, swear up and down that their kids are the most important things to them. Yet they'll say that and they won't see their kids. I was watching the Hall of Fame, the Pro Football Hall of Fame ceremonies this weekend, and there were a couple of the people that got inducted into the Hall of Fame, um, Jimmy Johnson being one of them, who apologized to his kids because he said he never saw them, and he said that was a relationship that he had to work to prepare because he was always doing whatever he needed to do to make his football team the best that it could be. That would be the same person that would say, my kids and my marriage are the most important things to me, but the actions don't back that up. And in Brianna's case, I don't know for fact, none of us know for fact, but it just makes me wonder where the priorities were. And it's your priorities are your priorities. You want what you want. As long as the person that you're with or the person that's responsible to you, as long as they understand that, even though children don't understand it. And I don't know. Ultimately, it's just sad in Brianna's case, primarily because she wanted a child. She made a choice that wound up being a bad choice. And I'm not saying that in a judgmental way. She basically said it with the fact that she went into a depression when she realized she could have had the child. Yeah. But when meeting someone, it just speaks to the conversations that you need to have about what their intentions are, what they value, the role that marriage and children plays in their lives, and how devoted they are to that. And yeah, would you quit that job that you love so much for us, your husband, in my case, and your kids? A lot of people would say no. They wouldn't say flat out no. They just try to argue you down without saying no and convince you not to ask them that question. Life, man. Life, man, it's interesting. We all just need to take a honest self assessment and determine what we really want in life, and where those things that we want fit in the grand scheme of life. I think it's fair. We all need to do it. And I think it's fair to ask the person that same thing. It's like if you are dedicated to a career, for example, and you're my wife and you're a big timer and I never see you, that's rough. A couple episodes ago, or maybe a few episodes ago, I talked about Susan Rice and how her husband left his high paying job when she got appointed to the President Obama's administration. Her husband left his job, a good job, to follow her while she pursued her dream to take care of the kids. And from what I've read about life in the White House, that's definitely not a 9 to 5 job. I don't think I needed to read to know that. But not only is it not a 9 to 5 job, it's not a 12-hour job, it's not a 16-hour job. You might go home just to change clothes and then go right back to the White House. If you're a spouse, I, I, how does that conversation go? It's like, okay, but it's only going to be for a few years, and then you'll have me all to yourself. If you can just hold out for like 4 to 8 years, then then I'll be all yours. That's a lot to ask for. That's a lot to ask for. But that's really what ultimately what I wanted to talk about when it came to Brianna. I was just really fascinated by the fact that they made the choice that they made. Not saying it's good or bad, but that's the choice that they made. And just wondering out loud what the conversation was or what the conversations were between her and her husband in making that choice. Yeah, because, yeah, that's interesting. That is so interesting. But with that said, that's all I have to say about that. In closing, I want to mention a couple other things. First and foremost, I talk about people who've been married for over 20 years and now they're getting divorced. And I always talk about how that's such a bad thing. And I just don't understand how somebody, after all of this time, you would think they would have hit their stride and now they're getting divorced and all that, blah, blah, blah. And I was running through a nice little list and then I got away from it because fortunately, there wasn't any news of anybody getting divorced until now. Let's add another one to the list. Jim Belushi, who's most famous for being John Belushi's brother, but he was also on Saturday Night Live too, but he was never his brother. Anyway, but shoot, he didn't get coked out and die when he was in his 30s either, like John did. So, hey, he's successful for that alone, even if he didn't achieve commercial success in the way that John did in his short life. Anyway, Jim Belushi filed for divorce after 23 years of marriage to his wife. Jim Belushi now is 67 years old. He is going to be back in these streets as a 67-year-old single man. What do you do when you're single and you're 67 and you've been married for 23 years? Like what? Run holes? I mean, yeah, you go on Tinder. It's like what do you do? If I'm 67 and I've been married for 23 years, I just figure that there just has to be a way that we can work this out. There just has to be. Because the wife, where are you going? Jim Belushi, where are you going? Let's just sit our asses down and just figure out the best way to make this thing work. I just don't understand it, but it's not for me to understand. But yes, chalk that up as another one that's on the slide after 20 years of being with somebody. Go figure. Also, I want to shout out. She's dead, so it's really no shouting her out. But I want to mention Marky Post died. For people that don't know Marky Post, she was the lawyer, the stuck-up lawyer on the sitcom Night Court. I used to love that show for some reason. So I saw that she died the other day, but also Charles Robinson, who also was on Night Court. He was the black dude. He was the bailiff on the show. He died last month, and I didn't even hear anything about that. As you can tell, I just really liked that show back in the day. So yeah, that sucks for them, unless of course they wanted to die. So Marky Post and Charles Robinson, hey, shout out to both of your memories. And also because they come in threes, this man wasn't on Night Court, but he was a football coach. He is Bobby Bowden. He died over this weekend. But with that said, Bobby Bowden was 91 years old. You know, I'm not shedding a tear for somebody who died when he's 91. You lived. You lived. And again, I mentioned this I think in the last episode, in the last episode, the old man shit episode. Bobby Bowden was 91 years old. And I talked about how men of a certain age, if you look back in their past, I feel comfortable saying that they probably said or did some things that wouldn't be acceptable today. And Bobby Brown, he's done things unacceptable. But Bobby Bowden, a 91-year-old Southern white man, yeah, yeah, yeah. I bet my house that he said the N word before. But anyway, on that note, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for downloading, subscribing. You can find this podcast for people who, if you're listening to it, you know how to find it. But just in case you want to tell somebody, because you need to be telling 50 friends to tell 50 friends, if you wanted to tell them how to find it, you can just tell them that the podcast is available on all of the platforms, your Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, your Amazon podcast, your Odyssey podcast, any place you can think of that has podcasts, we are on it. So go download it and set it to auto download so you'll always have the latest episodes and all of that good stuff. Or you can watch on YouTube, but nobody really watches on YouTube. I am just there because I'm just there to appease Reggie, really. Speaking of Reggie, say goodbye, Reggie. Reggie's not speaking. Reggie was actually here. Reggie was actually here this weekend and we hung out. So shout out to him. Shout out to his family. Well, I don't need to shout him out. It's his show. Anyway, all right, I'm out of here. Goodbye, y'all.